Hi everyone, I'm Xelo Forés and I'm going to present my paper, The Shakespearean Fantasy of the Sandman. I will begin with the introduction, the objectives, theoretical framework and methodology, and then I will go through Gaiman and the Sandman, Shakespeare and the Sandman, with the bargain, A Midsummer Night's Dream and the Tempest, finally the conclusions and the references. From the late 70s and especially during the 80s, there was a change in the production of graphic novels, aiming at more adult contents. In this sense, Neil Gaiman's The Sandman, published as a serialized comic from the 1988 until 1996, is one of the most important cultural products operating this change. Gaiman is the creator of the story, collaborating with different illustrators along the saga, employing complex references to set the framework of the story and to develop the plot. This paper studies these complex literary, mythological, and historical references, but I focus on Gaiman's use of Shakespeare and his works as one of his main sources of inspiration, to the point of transforming the Sandman into a Shakespearean fantasy. The objectives are to study the Sandman as a non-canonical Shakespearean appropriation, to analyze text and image, to analyze how popular culture products such as the Sandman appropriate and recycle the Shakespearean legacy. The basic concepts and the main theories combined to develop a further research study how Shakespeare's plays are being appropriated under the trend of non-canonical fiction are Cultural Capital by Pierre Bourdieu, Intertextuality by Julia Kristeva, Transtextuality by Gerard Genet, Paratextual References in Graphic Novels by Brandon Christopher, Theories of Adaptations and Appropriations by Linda Hutcheon and Julie Sanders, Theories of Popular Culture in Shakespeare by Douglas Lanier, Shakespeare and Youth Culture by Kevin Wedmore, and Studies on the Sandman by Annalisa Castaldo and Julie Round. Neil Gaiman's The Sandman has greatly contributed to transform the concept and the cultural value of graphic novels, positioning them beyond the fringe between adult and young fiction. This transformation in the way of approaching topics, with the aim of creating a mature piece of visual literature, a true work of art which targets adult people with adult standards, has had a deep influence on cultural media. In The Sandman, the references employed to set the framework of the story and to develop the plot are intellectually far more complex than any other graphic novel has applied before. Gaiman makes all kinds of cultural references, some of them more explicit than others, from the mythological and historical background of the whole story to the literary quotations and the use of pop icons and youth culture references. The main character of the comic series is the Lord of Dreams, a kind of god known under names such as Dream or Morpheus, although never directly called Sandman. In fact, with respect to the self-referential nature of youth culture, the dark aesthetic of Dream seems to be inspired by the physical aspect of charismatic Robert Smith, singer and leader of the British after-punk band The Cure. Neil Gaiman was the creator and scriptwriter of the story of the Sandman, which was published by American DC Comics and later by its imprint Vertigo, addressed to the adult consumer segment of graphic novel market. He took the idea from an old DC story, which was not successful in its time, and transformed it into a complete series comprising 75 numbers with some other special extra volumes added, collaborating with different illustrators along the saga. The series is full of literary, mythological, and historical references, but Gaiman uses Shakespeare and his works as one of his main sources of inspiration, appearing in 3 issues of the saga. The first appearance is part of the story Men of Good Fortune, in number 13, in 1990, and the playwright is the co-protagonist in 2 complete chapters of the collection, issue 19, A Midsummer Night's Dream, in 1990, and number 75, The Tempest, in 1996. Although Shakespeare's presence is limited, his influence pervades the whole story and defines the personality of Dream. Therefore, the Sandman's complex narrative and pictorial visual style helped to establish a new way of telling stories to grown-up young adults. This new combination of narrative and artistic elements made the Sandman an incredibly powerful cultural product, which has attracted people who had never read a graphic novel before. Thus, especially its diffusion in intellectual modern circles of American university colleges settled this comic book as a cornerstone in the establishment and promotion of the graphic novel as a reputed form of cultural expression with no lesser values of any other literary novel. It's not strange that the Shakespearean legacy adapted itself so well to the medium proposed by Gaiman in The Sandman, where almost everything is possible in an imaginary universe inhabited by fantastic creatures which interact with humans, just like in Shakespeare's theatre usually happens. Thus, this visual medium seems to reproduce the magical atmosphere represented in the Elizabethan plays, but convey with the artistic and literary resources proper of the graphic novel, which in many aspects may also expand its effects among his readers. Gaiman's The Sandman owes its repute to its ability to combine specific Shakespearean references with the narrative visual art of graphic novels, evoking Shakespeare's literary world clearly and in depth. Furthermore, Shakespeare, as the representative of the highest form of cultural capital in our contemporary society, is appropriated to experiment with the Shakespearean universe through graphic novels and thus departing towards new creative perspectives. Despite the fact of having direct Shakespearean references all in several chapters of The Sandman, Gaiman uses them as a general framework shaping the main character and the development of the whole story. Gaiman exploits Shakespeare's cultural capital along the saga, and also his own individual exploration as a creator comes together with the evaluation of Shakespeare's troubles and responsibilities as a creator too. Moreover, the building of the graphic novel mirrors the creation of Shakespeare's plays in a constant game of parallels reflecting the author's connection to the world of fantasy, while fighting with the everyday demands of reality. Gaiman's The Sandman makes extensive use of Genette's transtextual elements, beginning with the titles of the different issues and chapters in the collection, especially those referring to A Midsummer Night's Dream and The Tempest, which clearly allude to Shakespeare's plays in a game of paratextual and intertextual allusions. We have to remember that all types of transtextuality are closely related and cannot be separated. Hence, there are evident intertextual and hypertextual connections between Shakespeare's plays and Gaiman's graphic novel, which establish the deep relationship between what is clearly stated and what is evoked in The Sandman. In this sense, we could mention the direct quotations and allusions to Shakespeare's works and life, but also in a deeper level, all types of clues which help to evoke the world of the bard, setting his creative atmosphere in a confusing frontier between fantasy and reality. This is the aim of the use of faction, which means the literary combination of fiction and facts, resorting to the use of well-known historical characters along the story, such as the playwrights Kit Marlowe and Ben Jonson, who appear as crucial interventions in Shakespeare's creative process along his life. Marlowe is shown talking to Shakespeare about their plays and the ability to compose good theatre works, when Morpheus overhears the conversation and first approaches the bard in the tavern to propose him a deal. Johnson is shown visiting Shakespeare just on the 5th of November, walking in the countryside when casually they watch people preparing the bonfire with the dummy representing Guy Fawkes, and both compose the popular rhymes for the celebration of the Gunpowder Plot. Gaiman builds up a whole intricate universe where the relationship between the world of fantasy and reality is always at play. The main character of the story is Dream. The Lord of Dreams is the supreme maker of fantasy and stories. He will directly intervene in Shakespeare's life and work along the development of the Sandman's story. In the 3 chapters of the saga devoted directly to the playwright. In the comic, Shakespeare's compelling desire to become a creator of eternal plays makes him take decisions which will bring unexpected consequences in his own life. The first appearance of Shakespeare in the plot of the Sandman is in the story of Men of Good Fortune, the issue number 13, illustrated by Michael Sully, and included in the graphic novel called The Doll's House, the second volume of the saga. This part of the story is settled in a tavern in 1589 England, when Morpheus offers a bargain to Shakespeare to gain the gift of writing plays which will be always remembered. The bard signs with Morpheus this kind of Faustus-like pact and commits himself to write 2 plays for him as a payment. The first installment of the payment will be done at the beginning of his career, and the last installment will be paid at the end of his life. The first installment will be A Midsummer Night's Dream, and the last installment will be The Tempest. Round comments, despite the fact that the comic book assigns an external origin for the 2 Shakespearean plays, which are considered as more original for not relying on classical sources, Gaiman's intention may be giving Shakespeare a divine origin for his inspiration. Thus, Gaiman also contributes to increase the creative attributes of the playwright, giving the message that Shakespeare has been touched magically by a god, and then he is able to share his godlike gift with the humankind. The story deployed in the Sandman establishes an undeniable bond between the main character of the comic book and Shakespeare, which contributes greatly to define Morpheus' personality. Moreover, the link with the bard is vital to create Morpheus' identity, which grows in parallel to the development of Shakespeare's life and works. Therefore, this graphic novel is relevant because it revises the Shakespearean myth while it opens a way of applying Shakespearean references both from the plays and from the playwright's life in order to help to define the identity of a character and also mark the path of the whole narration. Furthermore, Morpheus may be interpreted as a Shakespearean creation, as a fantastic recreation of some Shakespearean tragic characters such as Hamlet. The King of Dreams is shown as a thoughtful, introspective, contradictory and dark sovereign with great powers, but especially interested in the ability to create stories as a way of making fantasy available to humans and thus giving them the chance of enjoying the art of fiction, a gift owned by gods. In this sense, Dream is more than a god or a king, as he belongs to the so-called Seven Endless, which represent immortal forces with human-like appearance, such as destiny, desire, or despair, who inhabit parallel spheres, but who interact with human beings. The relationship of Dream with their brothers and sisters, and also with the other inhabitants of the parallel universes, is complex and tempestuous. Morpheus and Hamlet both were absent for some time from their lands, but when they came back, they tried to recover the kingdoms and attempted to reestablish the former order. Both committed themselves to a mission of restoration of lost values, but at the same time creating new and even worse circumstances which led them to inner doubts and fatal errors, with the loss of innocent people. The acclaimed A Midsummer Night's Dream won the World Fantasy Award in 1991 for the best short story, thus becoming the first comic book which has got a literary prize. Gaiman's A Midsummer Night's Dream is very interesting because it sets the fiction characters from the play and his own author in the same space and time, sharing a performance arranged by Morpheus as the first installment in payment for the bargain signed by Shakespeare. In this theatrical performance, Shakespeare is accompanied by his troupe and his own son, Hamlet. The story shows how Titania and Oberon, the queen and king of fairies, with all the creatures which inhabit the kingdom of fantasy, enter into the real world to attend the release of the play. Unexpectedly, during the performance, Puck decides to escape to stay among mortals, and Shakespeare's son is abducted by the queen of fairies. This fact is especially transcendent, as in the notes written by Gaiman, he ends a chapter citing Hamlet's real date of death in 1596, which is 3 years after the performance for Morpheus and the King of Queen of Fairies, when Titania prepared his abduction. This paratextual reference acts immediately in our memory as a reminder of the possible origin for the bard's impulse to write a tragedy of Hamlet based on his own personal tragedy of losing his son. The Tempest is the final part of all the series, making it to me the end of the whole story of Sandman, with a closing chapter dedicated again to the bard, as a recurring reference which seems to be intermingled with Morpheus' destiny along all the chapters of the series. In Gaiman's The Tempest, it seems evident the parallelisms established between Shakespeare and Dream, as both are creators and both fit from fantasy to live. In this chapter, Shakespeare writes the play as the last installment of Morpheus' bargain, and he mentions he wrote it especially for him. In fact, the graphic novel shows the intention of Gaiman to establish a clear identification between Morpheus and the main character of his display, Prospero, who was the rightful Duke of Milan, exiled on an island by his usurper brother. There, Prospero learned to use sorcery to have the power to control the other characters, as Dream himself does in Gaiman's story. Moreover, Morpheus visits the bard in dreams to ask for his last play, and in some scenes of this chapter, they chat while walking in the recognizable scenery of the shores of the island described in Shakespeare's The Tempest. And finally, the conclusions. In The Sandman, Shakespeare appears for the first time as a character integrated in the story of the main character, Morpheus. Their interaction makes the plot evolve while giving depth and complexity to the narration. Dream himself is a Hamletian character, dark and melancholic, trying to recover his kingdom lost after his absence. At the same time, this relationship between the playwright and the Lord of Dreams poses interesting questions related to the process of creation, the source of the gift to create stories, and also its implications. With more radical appropriations, such as Gaiman's The Sandman, the Shakespearean legacy expands and opens towards popular culture, transforming and enriching the way we understand Shakespeare's plays today. And to finish, I will show you the references I have used to prepare this presentation. The primary sources and also the secondary sources. So thanks very much for listening to me.